and Women Inequality, Strategies to Promote Opportunity. This is a busy time of year. Those of you who are seasoned advocates, you know that Appropriations Committee is convening today, and so we'll have members of the committee in and out, and I may ultimately have to leave at some point to present two bills and appropriations. So we hope that you will understand. But I'd like to welcome all of you here in the audience, as well as those who are tuning in via Senate television or looking on your computer. We'll hear today both from our invited panelists as well as those who are in the room today who wish to testify during public testimony at the end of the hearing. But we're also listening to those who are watching via live stream, and we'll work to integrate your thoughts, experiences, and questions via tweet and Facebook into today's discussion. To participate, use hashtag InPovertyCalifornia, InPovertyCA, all caps. Again, that's hashtag InPovertyCA. CA is, of course, capitalized. I'd like to thank all of the advocacy organizations and think tanks who have put some amazing documents together for us that are available on the Select Committee's website currently. Some amazing white papers on the status of poverty in California today. Everyone from Child Action to Children's Defense Fund to the Center on Budget Policy and Priorities. There are just a number of amazing organizations who've done incredible work on this overall global issue of poverty. And as a policymaker, as well as advocates, having this research-based background information is really, really helpful, I think, as we all collectively work to educate members of the legislature, as well as the general public about why this is such a critical issue. Last year, the Senate Select Committee on Women and Inequality held several hearings and numerous in-depth discussions to probe sources and solutions for California's systemic disparities, focusing on the connections between race, gender, and poverty. We recognize the need to destigmatize poverty, to prioritize opportunity for children, and to acknowledge our challenges and begin moving forward to solve them. I look forward to continuing those global and granular discussions this year through the Select Committee. Lifting women and their families out of poverty and eradicating racial discrimination are the best ways to help marginalized children realize their full potential and to help our society make opportunity real. With that, I'd like to open it up for our first panel. And again, the focus of today's poverty is to really begin to extract and hear from experts in the field, both grassroots and grass tops, who are going to bring forward policy recommendations toward the ultimate goal of developing a tangible, measurable plan to reduce, if not end, poverty for California's children. The first panel, who will again talk about strategies to impact poverty and deep poverty, Alyssa Anderson, Senior Policy Analyst with the California Budget and Policy Center, Michelle Stilwell-Parvinsky, Senior Policy and Government Affairs Manager, Children's Defense Fund, California, and Antoinette Dozier, Staff Attorney, Western Center on Law and Poverty. Thank you all for the work you do every day, and thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your presentations, which are going to be between 7 and 10 minutes. Because we have a floor session today, I'm going to really hold you accountable to the time because we've got a hard stop. Again, thank you for being with us. Who's going to start? Okay, great.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today and to contribute to this committee's important work. My name is Alyssa Anderson, and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst at the California Budget and Policy Center, which recently launched a new initiative to identify policies to reduce poverty and broaden economic opportunity in California. And this work and the work that you're doing here through this committee is critically important. Poverty is one of the biggest challenges facing our state. As you know, California is one of the wealthiest states in the nation, but millions of state residents struggle to support themselves and their families. And this has significant consequences for our future. Poverty is costly in both human and economic terms. The research on this is clear. Growing up in poverty limits opportunities for children to reach their full potential. The longer children spend in poverty, the more likely they are to stay in poverty as adults. And that's because the disadvantages of poverty early in life, for example, not getting enough to eat, mean that low-income children really don't have a fair shot to succeed in school and beyond. And that lost human potential costs us all by putting our future workforce and economy at stake. The good news, however, is that poverty is a problem we can address. We know this because we've made some significant gains in the past reducing poverty. For example, our nation cut poverty among seniors by over 2/3 in the last half century by expanding Social Security. We also cut child poverty by about 1/3 since the 1960s by making investments in a range of public supports, including food and housing assistance. And we have evidence that our public support system remains effective today. Support such as unemployment insurance, food assistance, and tax credits for working families lifted almost 5 million Californians, including about 1.4 million children, above the poverty line each year during the first few years following the Great Recession. And these supports also cut the deep poverty rate by 3/4, and the deep poverty rate is the percentage of people living below half the poverty line. So this suggests that we can lift even more people out of poverty and deep poverty by strengthening the policies that we know work. So what works, and what can we do in California to reduce poverty? First, I think it's important to recognize that reducing poverty will require a sustained and broad-based effort. We have to address all the various obstacles that prevent people from moving up the economic ladder, including low-wage jobs, insufficient access to affordable childcare, an inadequate safety net, and a lack of affordable housing, to name a few. And so I would just want to highlight a few of the key policies that will help to address some of these obstacles. Boosting wages and incomes must be central to any poverty reduction effort because most families living in poverty have jobs. The problem is their jobs just don't pay enough. And research shows that raising incomes works, not just because it relieves immediate hardship, but because raising incomes may actually reduce the likelihood that poverty continues in the next generation. Studies find that increasing families' incomes improves children's outcomes. Low-income children tend to perform better in school, and they may even earn more as adults when their families' incomes are raised. So investing in low-income families and children today extends to the next generation, and that means it pays off for all of us over the long run. So how can California boost wages and incomes? One way, of course, is to raise the state's minimum wage and tie it to inflation. California took an important step last year and raised the minimum wage for the first time since 2008. But it's still not sufficient to lift a parent raising 2 children above the poverty line, even if that parent works full-time. And because the minimum wage isn't tied to inflation, that parent's earnings will continue to lose purchasing power each year, absent additional raises. Another way California can boost incomes is to create a refundable state-earned income tax credit, EITC, that builds on the federal EITC. The federal credit raises incomes by encouraging and rewarding work, and it actually lifts more children out of poverty than any other federal policy. It also produces long-term benefits for children. Children whose families receive more income from refundable tax credits tend to do better in school, are more likely to attend college, and may even earn more as adults. And because of the success of the federal EITC, half the states and the District of Columbia have created their own credit. And we think that California ought to establish one as well. And I should stress that only a refundable credit would benefit the lowest income families. Also, creating a state EITC and raising and indexing the minimum wage work best in combination with each other because together these policies reach more people than either policy would on its own. And so we really need both of these policies to have the greatest impact on poverty. In addition to boosting wages and incomes, reducing poverty will require greater investments in our core public supports, and particularly supports that help people work, like childcare. Childcare is one of the most expensive items in many families' budgets. Without access to subsidized childcare, the typical single mother in California would have to spend 70% of her income to cover the full cost of care for an infant and a school-aged child. And with state funding for subsidized childcare significantly below where it was before the recession began, many families have lost access to care, and they're faced with extremely difficult choices about where to leave their children so that they can keep working. So increasing access to high-quality, affordable childcare would be a wise investment for California. Would not only move more families toward financial security by helping parents to work and earn more, but it could also contribute to a stronger future for the next generation, because research shows that low-income children who receive high-quality care tend to do better in school. And CalWORKs is another critical public support that we think should be strengthened. Currently, CalWORKs does not provide enough support on its own to lift families with children above the deep poverty line. And the maximum grant for a family of 3 has lost more than half of its purchasing power since 1989. So California could move more families toward financial security by increasing CalWORKs grants so that at a minimum, no family has to live in deep poverty. California could also restore annual cost of living increases and make other improvements to the program, such as ending the counterproductive maximum family grant policy. And strengthening CalWORKs is a particularly important strategy for reducing deep poverty. Research shows that deep poverty is directly linked to the weakening of the safety net. Deep poverty surged following welfare reform in spite of the strong economy at that time because people with significant barriers to work were unable to meet strict work requirements. The problem is public policies increasingly emphasize work as the primary pathway out of poverty, but people in deep poverty tend to face multiple significant challenges such as homelessness, physical disabilities, chronic illnesses, and mental health problems that make it very difficult to maintain steady employment. So moving people out of deep poverty will require addressing those barriers first. And recently, California made significant changes to CalWORKs that are intended to better address those barriers. And we think the state should carefully monitor the impact of those changes to ensure that they are indeed effective. California could also provide additional support to expand the CalWORKs Housing Support Program, which has helped thousands of homeless families secure permanent housing since the program was established last year. But currently, it's only meeting a fraction of the need. And this program makes sense because it's extremely hard to find work or to maintain a job if you don't have stable housing. So those are just a few of the key policies that we think ought to be part of a broad-based effort to reduce poverty. Just very quickly, a few others include reversing the recession-era cuts to SSI/SSP grants, putting into place flexible workplace policies to help workers better balance work and family responsibilities, and also increasing the affordability of housing, both through policies that increase our supply of affordable housing, but also that help to provide immediate relief to families who are struggling with skyrocketing rents right now. So to close, I just want to reiterate that poverty is a problem we have the tools to address, and it's a matter of making greater investments in already proven strategies. And we'd all benefit from those investments because ultimately they strengthen our economy and improve our quality of life. Thank you very much.
I think we'll go ahead and hear from the entire panel. Absolutely, thank you. I thought that I couldn't hear. Thank you for bringing that to attention. Everyone should move the mics a little closer to you. I think we'll wait and have our questions at the end of everybody's presentation because I will come back to you and ask you the million-dollar question, price tag, and where do we get it from? So begin to kind of think about that. Who's going to present next?
Hello, my name is Michelle Stoll-Parvensky, Senior Policy and Government Affairs Manager at Children's Defense Fund, California. I want to thank Senator Mitchell and the committee for holding this critical, forward-thinking hearing to develop a strategy to reduce child poverty in California and end deep poverty among children. Children's Defense Fund has worked relentlessly for more than 40 years to ensure a level playing field for all children. CDF grew out of the civil rights movement and Dr. Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign, and we continue to champion policies that lift children out of poverty. Child poverty is a moral and economic crisis in our state. Growing up poor negatively impacts the entire trajectory of a child's life. Child poverty creates gaps in cognitive skills that can be seen in early childhood and continue to grow with age. Deep poverty can produce toxic stress that we know literally rewires a child's brain and negatively impacts brain functioning for life. As a result, child poverty jeopardizes children's health and their ability to learn in school. All of these disadvantages compound and have lifelong consequences, negative consequences for children. Ultimately, child poverty fuels an intergenerational cycle of poverty, as poor children are more likely to grow up to be poor adults or poor parents. Further, we can't afford child poverty and its substantial economic costs. Child poverty costs the nation an estimated $500 billion per year in lost productivity and earnings and increased health and crime costs. CDF estimates that California's share of the cost of child poverty is approximately $66 billion per year. But we know what to do to reduce child poverty. Child poverty is a solvable problem. Children's Defense Fund's new report, Ending Child Poverty Now, based on analysis from the nonpartisan Urban Institute, found that the nation could reduce child poverty by 60% by investing in existing, proven federal programs and policies. The cost to implement these programs and lift 6.6 million children, including 1.3 million California children, out of poverty would be just 2% of the federal budget. At the state level, California can significantly reduce child poverty by investing in proven and existing state programs and policies. The United Kingdom provides a modern example of how a concerted effort to reduce child poverty can be successful. In 1999, Prime Minister Tony Blair's government committed to ending child poverty and set a national child poverty target. Through a multi-pronged approach, they were able to reduce child poverty by more than half over 10 years, and those reductions persisted during the recession. Britain's ambitious anti-poverty initiative consisted of 3 strands, which will sound somewhat similar to what we've heard previously. A set of policies to promote work and make work pay, increased financial support for families, and a series of long-term investments in children. If the UK can dramatically reduce child poverty, so can California. When the UK declared war on poverty in 1999, 1 in 4 children lived in poverty, similar to where we are in California today. 10 years later, 1.8 million fewer British children were poor. What we need is the political will to say California will no longer tolerate children being poor, hungry, or homeless, and to commit as a state to ending child poverty. So how do we do it? The quickest way to reduce child poverty is to improve the economic circumstances of poor families with children. Research shows that investments in increasing resources for poor families produces long-term benefits. Children from families who receive income boosts have better birth outcomes, higher test scores, higher graduation rates, and increased economic security later in life. One study found that children in low-income families that received an additional $3,000 per year between birth and age 5 on average earned 17% more as adults. A bold vision to end child poverty in California involves a combination of strategies that we know work. We need a multi-pronged approach that includes, first, boosting employment, wages, and income for families. Second, ensuring that children's basic needs are met by strengthening the safety net. And third, making those long-term investments that we know are necessary in children's programs to break the cycle of poverty. So first, we need to ensure that parents have jobs that pay enough to support a family. So we need policies that increase employment and make work pay for parents. Some of the programs that we can invest in are ones that we know work. Enacting a refundable state earned income tax credit, which we know is one of the most effective tools for reducing child poverty. Raising the minimum wage so we can make sure that no family who works full-time is living in poverty, and those families can move closer to self-sufficiency. We can expand the number of childcare slots for low-income children, and that really works to combat poverty through 2 pathways. First, providing that childcare enables families to work and increases the economic resources available to families immediately. And second, we know that high-quality childcare is critical to breaking the cycle of poverty by providing the skills that those children need to have future economic and academic success. So second, we need to ensure that all children's basic needs are met by strengthening the social safety net. Our entire state benefits when we protect children from deep poverty, homelessness, and extreme economic hardship, all of which profoundly limit children's opportunities to be successful as adults. So some of the strategies that within this area that we really need to look at are protecting children from deep poverty by increasing CalWORKs benefits and eliminating the maximum family grant rule, which we heard about, reducing child hunger by increasing participation in CalFresh, particularly important because California has one of the lowest participation rates in the nation. And we need to invest in affordable housing by providing dedicated resources to develop rental housing that's affordable for extremely low-income families. California's housing affordability crisis is a significant contributor to the state's high poverty rate. In order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent, a parent earning minimum wage has to work 115 hours per week year-round in order to afford that apartment. And lack of affordable housing can drive families into homelessness. An astounding 4% of California students experienced homelessness in the 2012-13 school year. Finally, we need to make the long-term investments in children that are necessary to break the cycle of poverty. We know that children need access to affordable health coverage and care. Research shows that giving children a healthy start improves school performance, adult health, and future earnings. We also need to make sure that poor children have access to quality early learning and high-quality schools, including removing any barriers that they have to attending school, like lack of access to transportation. And finally, we need to dismantle the cradle-to-prison pipeline that is fast-tracking too many of our poor children, especially Black and brown youth, into the criminal justice system. California cannot afford to continue allowing a quarter of our children and a third of our African American and Latino children to grow up in poverty, harming their health and well-being and undermining their future academic and economic success. We cannot delay any longer. Children only have one childhood, and it is today. I hope this hearing is the first step to California committing to a goal of dramatically reducing poverty, especially among children. The solutions to child poverty exist if we're willing to invest in them, if we're willing to build the political will to ensure that all California children have the opportunity to meet their full potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome Select Committee members, Senators Lieu and McGuire, and welcome Senator McGuire. Senator Lieu and I hung out together last year on the Select Committee. We want to welcome our new Select Committee member, Senator McGuire. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have Ms. Dozier do her presentation, and we'll ask questions of the entire first panel. Fair enough? Thank you, Ms. Dozier.
Hi, my name is Antoinette Dozier. I'm a senior attorney with Western Center on Law and Poverty. Western Center was created out of a few legal clinics in Los Angeles during the War on Poverty. So we were uniquely situated and tasked with working to secure a strong safety net for California. I want to thank Senator Mitchell and the committee for holding this hearing, and my co-panelist for offering up, I think, recommendations that we at Western Center can definitely agree with and support. I'd like to highlight the reality of living in poverty and relying upon the safety net of all of the families in California who do so. Next year will mark the 20th anniversary of PRUA, the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996, which created the TANF program. The program is a key feature of what has been called welfare reform, which ostensibly sought to end long-term dependence on public assistance, offering cash aid to meet subsistence needs in exchange for work. But the history of TANF is marred by the critical role that the welfare queen construct played in the public debates around it and states' implementation of the program. Since 1996, research has consistently revealed that the welfare queen is a biased, false stereotype that has little to do with the actual realities of women, children, and families in need of public assistance, and that relying upon it for policies do little in the way of moving families out of poverty. However, it has pervaded our conversations about need-based programs like CalWORKS, SNAP, and Medi-Cal. To implement TANF, California created the California Work Opportunity and Responsibility Program. It's meant to protect the neediest and the most vulnerable amongst us, and to provide a pathway out of poverty. Many features of the CalWORKS program, however, are direct responses to the threat of the welfare queen, and don't make any sense for moving families out of poverty. Such features include family caps that limit benefits for babies born while the family is on aid, work-first programs requiring welfare recipients to work often for free or in low-wage, low-skilled jobs with limited access to training and education, and strict time limits that end CalWORKS aid after 24 months. As you've heard from my co-panelist, some of the recommendations are direct responses to those policies. Since the inception of CalWORKS, the percentage of CalWORKS families living in poverty and living in deep poverty has risen. According to the official poverty measure, 6.1 million Californians are currently living in poverty. When using the supplemental poverty measure, that number jumps to 8.7 million. Moreover, poverty remains gendered, with over 30% of households headed by women in California living in poverty. Children make up almost 80% of CalWORK's beneficiaries, while more than 90% of single-parent households receiving CalWORKs are headed by women. The opportunity part of the CalWORKs program has yet to be fully realized. CalWORKs needs to do more to offer a real opportunity to the women and children living in poverty. For many of my clients, the cash assistance amount is so low that they live in deep poverty, somewhere around 40% of the federal poverty level. This inhumane cash assistance amount robs families of the time, means, and opportunity to move their families and children out of poverty. Often I see parents that are stressed, in desperate need to provide the basic needs for their children, pushed from agency to obtain some of the basic barrier removal services like mental health services and health care, waitings in long lines, often having to disclose the most intimate details of their family lives and agree to give up the basic privacy that should be afforded to all of us as human beings in order to feed their children. They often have no means of transportation to get from appointment to appointment or to navigate the intricate details of agencies and have no idea how they're going to get their children to school or to a safe, reliable daycare provider. Very young children are often fully aware of and impacted by all of the stress, confusion, and anxiety that follow families during this process. Some of the families that I see live on a maximum grant amount of $541. They're barely able to pay rent. If they are able to obtain housing, it is often inhabitable and precarious. For example, I've heard from mothers and children living in rooms with strangers or in garages that they have found on Craigslist or in social media. This is often the only affordable housing they can find, and yet counties can't support them in that housing. As the rental market in California constricts due to a lack of available affordable units and an increased demand for rental housing, the poorest among us are pushed out, unable to afford market rate housing in areas of the state that offer real opportunities for pathways out of poverty. For those able to find affordable housing, it is often located in neighborhoods far from employment opportunities, riddled with overcrowded, overburdened, poor-performing schools, and with little outdoor space or recreation for children and families. The housing is often located far from work opportunities that provide living wages, from education and training opportunities for high school jobs, and poor transportation networks that leave them isolated in communities of need. Once again, we see our city segregated with mothers and children losing. I'd like to highlight one of my clients' story. Her name is Christine. She's the mother of a 3-year-old. Christine had trouble in her K-12 education with reading and writing. She often couldn't understand why. She was unable to understand some of the simple concepts that her classmates were able to understand. She left school, she did graduate. She obtained a waitressing job where she progressed and became a manager. She lost that job after the business closed, and she had a very difficult time finding alternative employment. She was able to find sometimes part-time work and intermittent work, waitressing, and making sandwiches in a sandwich job. She was actually very proud of her work, but it was a job that did not provide a living wage for she and her daughter. She often had to travel up to 4 hours each way to take her child to daycare and for her to go to work. And the money that she was able to make was insufficient to actually meet their basic needs or to retain housing. So she had to seek help from public assistance. During her work assessment, her worker actually informed her that waitressing and the hospitality work in her part of the county was actually diminishing, and that there were going to be limited work opportunities for her in that program, and asked her what else she might be interested in doing. And she explained that she was interested in caring for others, children or the elderly. So her worker did refer her to a community college where she was for the first time identified as an individual with a learning disability. After being given remedial courses in education and math and with help with her learning disabilities, she was actually doing very well. However, after her next meeting with a new CalWORKs worker, she was told that she could not continue in this education program to become a licensed nurse because she had taken remedial courses and was now employable with her previous work experience and the remedial classes completed. She was also asked perhaps, if she would like to be a home health aide. Although home health aides provide a vital service to California residents, the job may not be the path out of poverty that her worker thought it may be. Since the inception of CalWORKs, the economic realities of CalWORKs have shifted. The New York Times reported that nearly 3/4 of families receiving public assistance are headed by workers, and 50% of work-required CalWORKs recipients actually have earnings. Their work rely upon CalFresh, Medi-Cal, housing supports, child care, education subsidies, and cash aid to get by. Many of the lowest skilled growing occupations are dominated by women, and in particular women of color, while high-skilled growing occupations are dominated by men. For example, over 88% of home health aides and 94% of child care workers are women. It's not that these jobs are not valuable to our community and society, it's that we have so devalued mothering and caregiving that we do not ensure living wages, benefits, and work protections for these workers, largely because the work has been historically done by women and women of color. My fellow panelist, Ms. Butler, will be speaking more about wages and the intersection between race and gender. Perpetuating long-term poverty, these low-wage occupations will only expand the burgeoning wealth gap. In the job market, my clients face stagnant low wages and limited resources for job training, making it nearly impossible for many to gain economic mobility. Many of my clients are often pushed into low-wage, low-skilled work like Christine, even when they try to reach for something more. Public benefits recipients who often try to move beyond those low-wage, low-skilled occupations typically find administrative roadblocks, such as delays in securing childcare, lack of basic work clothing, and transportation, or face sanctions and loss of aid when they try to access the limited training and education opportunities that exist in the program. I have heard from clients who have actually received job offers for living wage jobs and couldn't attend the training because they didn't have the requisite business attire that they needed and were denied assistance from the county. Our clients not only don't have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days of business attire that's necessary for such jobs, they don't know anybody who does. The CalWORKs policies that shuttle poor workers into this type of work really harken back to Jim Crow, right? Where Black workers were not only excluded from certain professions, but were actively pushed into low-skilled, low-wage work with little room for advancement and for which they had little control. Research shows that the economic disadvantages of poverty have cascading effects on family life. It means lower quality childcare, which compromises a child's ability to form healthy relationships. It means the burdens of overtime work, split shifts, third shift jobs, limit a parent's interaction with their children and with one another, thereby undermining parent-child relationships and two-parent families. I've heard from workers and from clients who were pushed into low-wage work that they have shift work that has no regular schedule. They face unexpected reduction in hours, often resulting in the loss of quality childcare that they were able to obtain, or split shifts that leave them little time for family and mothering, which often lack also the basic health and retire benefits that they would need to continue to care for themselves and their family. To make opportunity real for women, children, and families in the CalWORKs program and that are in need of our safety net benefits, we need to provide a humane grant amount and align our policies to reflect our beliefs that the poorest members of our community are valued. And we need to create real career pathways, not built upon stereotypes and that do not reinforce historical forms of discrimination. Poor women and children living in deep poverty are part of California's community. With changing demographics, they will make up more and more of California's population. Policies designed to harm these women harm all CalWORKs recipients, both women of color and non-women of color, and their kids. It also harms the rest of California. Poor women don't exist in a vacuum, and they can't be ignored. Thank you.